나들이는 못하네. 딱 가장 그 최 마음 못하는 쉬어도 그래.
Today I will continue where
나들이나
we left off the other day.
이랑이 라마단 법연기 신이 대에다 나 마기 지 두안에 손데 여기 상하가 발이야.
Now, the characteristics of gurus or teachers, spiritual friends, are taught in all the scriptures from the basis down from the foundation all the way up to the secret mantra. They're not only in the secret mantra. It says in the foundation vehicle that characteristics of a guru or master are taught to be those who have discipline, who know the rituals of it, and have a compassion for the sick, have a pure retinue, and strive to benefit with Dharma and material things, are given time, the advice are known as teachers. So these are 5 characteristics taught for the Kempos or the abbots of the foundation vehicle. The Mahayana, as well as it says in the ornament of the sutras, follow a friend who is subdued, peaceful, and pacified, who strives for higher qualities, enriched in scriptures, and who has realized suchness, is eloquent, has a loving character, and has given up weariness. So this is also these characteristics there. Now the characteristics of a guru in the secret mantra are scattered throughout the secret mantra, and there are quite a few of them. But all of these that are scattered around, that are scattered throughout the many individual tantras, are gathered in essence in this 50 verses of the Guru. And because it combines all of these, it became very influential both in India and in Tibet. In general, the secret mantra of the word Lama, the Tibetan word Lama, in translation of the Sanskrit Guru. So in Tibetan one says Lama, and in Sanskrit one says Guru. And the meaning of Guru, it has many different meanings. It has several meanings, actually, not many, but several meanings. But one of the meanings is that it's heavy or weighty. This is another thing that it means. And because of this, then guru means someone who is heavy or weighty with comedy, someone who has the heft of qualities, like someone you talk about someone who has some heft, right? This is what we're speaking about. Someone who is heavy with the load of course, who has the weight of all their qualities. And so that's what we mean when we say a guru. Now, another important thing is that we need to understand is that there are several types of gurus taught in the secret mantra. For example, in the commentary on the Ramakrishna Tantra by Krishnapada says, reading the true Dharma, giving, explaining, teaching pith instructions, bestowing empowerment, performing mandala activities, we assert there are 6 types of masters. So just as there are 6 types of masters, and so the textual explanation of the serving guru, the Sanskrit commentary, so the title of the commentary is the textual explanation of the serving on the Guru. So this is the Sanskrit commentary on the 50 verses. Now it's not clear who the author of this commentary was. It seems to have been translated by Goshanala Paul by the kindness of some Indian Pandita. So it's present as this the master helped, but it's not certain who the master actually was. In any case, what it says in this Sanskrit commentary, actually, no, this word happens earlier. Now, the word master appears later in the text. It appears in the Sanskrit, but it does not appear in the Tibetan translation. In any case, the masters, because of engaging activities such as giving empowerments, the person who does the work of giving empowerments, and because of that, they're called masters. Now, and then it gives the test from the Krishnapada, excuse me, from the Ramakrishna Tantra. just the word of reading the true Dharma and giving and so forth. It quotes these same words. So in any case, the Sanskrit commentary in the 50 verses is basically the same as Krishnapada's commentary. Now, many Tibetan scholars also following this say that that in terms of the gurus or masters taught in the sixth secret tantra, there are 6 different types. Now, of these 6 different types of masters, you wonder what they are. This is taught in the Chariot of the Karma Kamsan, taught by the second Kama Chinipa, Pengon Latsawa. So there it is described as, this is reading the true Dharma means it's the person who teaches the precepts of mantra. The second one is giving. This means that even before the empowerment is beginning, as according to you have use a dough ball to determine who your special deity is according to the Kriya Charya Tantra. And so this is, and also the person who gives the transmission, the recitation. Third is explaining. So explaining the Tantra. So this is someone teaching the tantras of chakras and vara and so forth. The fourth is teaching the pith instructions. This is basically guiding the student through the paths of creation and completion, or giving instructions. So basically giving the instructions. Fifth one is bestowing empowerments. So this is the person. And so the preliminary for the practice of the secret mantras is to receiving empowerment. So there's the guru who bestows the empowerment upon you. The sixth is the one who performs the activities of the mandala activities. So these are the master who performs the consecrations and fire pujas and so forth. So the master who performs these activities, who conducts the rituals, is the master. In any case, if we're talking about the types of gurus, we talk about there being several different ones, and not just the ones who give the empowerments. It's not just the guru from whom you receive the empowerment. Normally, we recognize the guru as the person from whom we receive the empowerment, but it's not just that. Also, the individuals who give you the instructions on the secret mantra, they're also gurus of the secret mantra. The people who also give you the transmissions of those are also gurus. You have to consider them to be gurus. And also the individuals who teach you the tantras should also be considered gurus. So for that reason, we normally think about giving empowerments, right? We think about that. We think that if we receive an empowerment from a guru, then we think that we have to consider them a guru. If there's someone else if somebody gives us a transmission of the secret mantra, or somebody gives an instruction of the secret mantra, we think probably, that's really not someone who doesn't need to go and included in the ranks of our gurus. But that's not quite right, as I said. In any case, the guru who teaches you the Dharma that's connected with the secret mantra, or introduces you to the practice of these dharmas, should also be considered a guru of the secret mantra. There's another way of classifying gurus. This one that's very well known in Tibet. As we talk about the guru and a root guru. We have a general guru, and then we have the root guru is even more important than that, even more significant. And so in this way we distinguish between the guru and the root guru. So what do we mean by root guru? Now, if you think about the most well-known explanation, the Kagyu tradition, it says Go Lota Shunapala wrote in the Blue Annals. The glorious Dahivaraju is not a lineage of the words, but a lineage of the meaning. And the meaning is that it's a lineage of the realization of stainless Mahamudra. So because of this, the guru from whom you are pointed out and recognized the realization of Mahamudra is the person who should be considered your root guru, and you should identify that one as your being root guru. So this is what Golota Shunapala. And so, and the eighth Karmapa Mitra Dorje also praised that way of describing it. So if you think about the most well-known Kagyu things is the guru from whom you are able to recognize the nature of Mahamudra is your root guru, or your crown. It should be considered your most important guru. Now, Mykyu Dorje also speaks about the topic of root guru in his 100 Shorts instructions. And I think it might be beneficial. I think it's a good explanation. So if we speak about that, then I'll talk about the meaning. I don't read the words, read it word for word, but in terms of the meaning, when we talk about a root guru, when you talk about root, that's a lot of significance. So the two words you have root and guru. Those are very important that it means root. For example, in terms of the Mahayana, I think about the Guru Lama would be, the best is something that if there's, because you rouse the two types of bodhicitta, the relative bodhicitta, either one of these two in your being, then in terms of the Mahayana, that guru from whom you realize that should be considered your root guru in terms of the Mahayana. In terms of the secret mantra, it's the guru from whom you are able to develop the realization of the inseparability of bliss and emptiness. This is your root guru in terms of the secret mantra. So in brief, the one who first produces that quality in your being, the one who helps you recognize the nature of mind when you have not seen it before, should be considered your root guru. Also should be someone who has the most significant one. In terms of the secret mantra, this view of the bliss emptiness inseparable is like the most important view of the secret mantra. And so the guru who produces that who instills that in you, the individual who does that, should be recognized as your root guru. And so that's such a kind root guru who has those qualities. And so even if 1,000 Buddhas came, they came to you and they said, and they'd say, that guru of yours, you shouldn't feel it. You shouldn't feel faith for that. So if 1,000 Buddhas were to come and try to prevent you from having faith, and they wouldn't be able to stop you, it'd be like irreversible. The fervor that you have, this real strong fervor. So this is the type of fervor dedication you should have, because of the incredible kindness of that guru. So it's such an incredibly kind guru that if 1,000 gurus come and say this guru of yours is no good, even so, they still wouldn't be able to prevent you. So you should be able to have that realization. So that sort of a guru, as I mentioned before, in terms of Mahayana, someone who's producing the realization of, who's producing relative or ultimate bodhicitta in your being. The person who is in terms of secret mantra is able to produce the realization of bliss, emptiness, and formula. At the very least, the person who helps you realize that the time of death is uncertain, that type of individual should also be considered, can also be considered a root guru. It's the person who is teaching you the genuine Dharma, the actual Dharma, who's giving you real experience of that. That is, you can call them your root guru. So, in brief, in order to consider someone your root guru, that guru must be like the condition. Because of the presence of that guru, you realize that all of the ordinary activities are like meaningless, that they're pointless. To feel like you're being completely deceived by them. And you see that there's no way not to work for the sake of your next lifetime, the sake of your next life, meaning even if you don't even if you don't wish to work for it, you see that it's something that you have to do. If you gain that sort of power, that sort of capacity, that sort of person can also be considered your seeker. See, even if you only receive a single word of Dharma from that person, then you can, if you think about that, you can think that person because they produce that quality within you. From that point on, you can consider them your root guru. So even if they haven't taught you a single word, even if you haven't received any words, but you merely see their face, even if you haven't heard any Dharma, but if you just merely see them, if you receive those blessings, if they have that influence on your being, if they change your way of thinking that much, then you can consider them your root guru. Even if you haven't heard a single word from them, and if you're just merely seeing their face, if they have that strong an influence, you can consider them your root guru. And sometimes you've never met that guru. For example, if the guru lives far away, or the guru has passed away, even in that case, if you just merely hear that guru, and you have, then it produces that large change of your mental mind stream, and someone is able to produce such a strong imprint in your being, then you can also consider them your root guru. If they're not able to have such a create change in your mind stream, but you make such a strong impression, but if they may have taught you tens of thousands of Dharma texts, or you may have received hundreds of thousands of empowerments and instructions for them, no matter what they've done, if they think that this is a good guru, they're a good lama, they're really definitely learned, venerable, and good. You think this, but that because of that guru, you haven't even either developed that revulsion in this, or developed the sense of urgency, or the recognition of karmic cause and effect. If you haven't had even the slightest bit of a change in the direction of Dharma because of that, then it's difficult to say that that guru is your root guru. So that's what Mikyo Dorje said. So there's, I think, a really important thing to understand here. Normally, when we talk about root gurus, this is what the main thing is, that's what we need to understand. And next, as I mentioned yesterday in the Sanskrit commentaries on the 50 verses, the textual explanation of the Serving the Gurus, and the commentaries by Jetsun Drapa Gyaltsen, Sachin Osa Gyaltsen, and Jangmen Konto Lodotai, and the Karma Kempo, according to them, the characteristics of a guru can be classified in two as the common and specific characteristics. However, as I said before, that's the Sanskrit commentary of Gyaltsen and the other lamas do describe their classification of the common and specific characteristics. They're the same in this, but they are different in the ways they divide it specifically. For example, Jetsun Drapa Gyaltsen, according to him, he says that for the 6 qualities from stable and soothe up through being honest, these 6 characteristics are the common characteristics, and everything down from after that, the remaining 9 are specific characteristics. At this point, I wonder when you talk about the common and the specific, if you think, well, what does that mean? And I think the common here means the characteristics a guru must have that are common to both the sutra and the tantra. Whereas the specific means those that are particular to the secret mantra, the particular characteristics of a guru in the secret mantra, I believe. In any case, today I will be speaking about the specific characteristics. The other day we spoke about the common characteristics, just why today we're in the passage speaking about specific characteristics. Now, the text that teaches the specific characteristics is, as I said before, according to Jensen Draping and so forth, then there are uh, uh, a couple of the characteristics that I taught the other day need to be included here in the spin. As I said, from from the stable and so forth, up to being honest, are the competent, and never the other rest of them. All the following ones are the characters, are the specific characteristics. Now, so this is well versed in the 10 suchnesses, skilled in the rites of drawing mandalas, able to explain the mantra, sincere and with tamed senses. Now, there is and then this spelling in the Tibetan in the Tenjur is a little bit off. It should be al bararaji. And there's also the word that says in the Tibetan it says completely pacified, but actually in many it says it should be up to dangwa, sincere. So there are some differences there. So here, no, recently there's been last year when I was teaching last year, I mentioned that there were two different mentioned there are two Sanskrit manuscripts, but neither of the two were completed. But recently, there was an old Sanskrit commentary that was recently discovered, and that is a complete manuscript. And so later, so the so here I'm showing the Sanskrit manuscript found in Tibet, as well as the Tibetan translation, as well as the Chinese translation by, as well as the English translation. So these are the words there. So I don't need to explain too much about that. Now, from the textual explanation on serving the gurus, it says, to continue teaching the qualifications of guru, well versed in the 10 suchnesses, it says. So it teaches the 10 suchnesses. So these are the 10 well-known. That's the well generally accepted number. And so it refers to the count. So in any case, what it's saying here is that the Sanskrit commentary on the 50 verses when it speaks about the 10 verses, they talk about specific characteristics of this, and so these are considered in the context. So today we're speaking about the division between this common and specific characters, primarily according to how it's taught in the Sanskrit commentary, the textual explanation on serving the guru. When we talk about the 10 suchnesses, well, what are they? They're mandala, samadhi, mudra, mantra, dance steps, seated postures, recitation, fire pujas, engaging in offering activities, and the dissolution phase. So these are the 10 different types. These are the 10 suchnesses. Now, generally in the secret mantra texts, there are several different enumerations of the 10 suchnesses. There are 5 or 6 actually. There are 10 or 6. There's the external 10 suchnesses, the secret 10 suchnesses, the 10 suchnesses of activity, and so forth. There are 5 or 6 different enumerations of the 10 suchnesses. If we wanted to go through all of them, for one thing, it would be extremely complicated. From another, there's just not enough time. So today, what I will explain among all of the 10 suchnesses, they're the basic ones that are necessary for the upper and the lower. These are Now, according to the ornament chapter of the Yoga Tantra Samagara, there's one that's taught there. And there's another one that is taught by the Vajragarbha Tantra. The Tattva Samgara and the Vajragarbha Tantra, Garbha Tantra. And so these talk about the secret and the external. We talk about the 10 external suchnesses that are taught. Match the 10 that are taught in the Sanskrit commentary on the textual explanation of serving the Guru. And so in the Yoga Nigutra there is it talks about 10 suchnesses that must be that are necessary for a Vajramaster to have. And so these are also match the ones taught in the Sanskrit commentaries. So the ones I will teach today are the external 10 suchnesses taught in the ornament chapter of the Vajragarbha Tantra, or the 10 suchnesses necessary for a Vajramaster taught in the Yoga Tantras, in the Yoga Tantra, the Tattva Samgraha. So the first of the 10 suchnesses is mandalas. So mandala here, I think that is because the basis of the ritual or the empowerment is that it's important for the guru to be knowledgeable about the presentations of the mandala. But it says in the textual explanation of the Sukha, it says there are 3 types of mandalas: mandalas of body, mandalas of speech, and mandalas of mind. In any case, at this point, when it says about mandalas, we're talking about this being learned in the suchness of the mandala, and when below it says skilled in the rites of drawing the mandalas. In the context of the 10 suchnesses, the suchness of the mandala means being learned in the general presentation of the mandalas. And below, when it speaks about the being learned in the rites of drawing mandalas, that should be understood as being the skilled in the practice of drawing and the practices of drawing the mandalas in sand or on canvas. Now, the second of these is samadhi. This is the suchness of samadhi. Suchness of samadhi is according to these Sanskrit commentaries. There are 3 types of samadhi because of the classification of the initial application, the supreme kingdom of mandala, and the essence of the supreme kings of activity. These are the 3 types of samadhis. Now, these 3 samadhis that are well known these 2 well-known samadhis that are talked about in it's like they're a real summary of the main practice of many different sadhanas. And so for this reason, in the Yoga Mahajras, these 3 samadhis are taught. These 3 samadhis are also taught in the Mahayoga Tantras. Also in the Mahayoga Tantras, there are father and mother tantras, and these 3 samadhis are also taught in them, in both the father and mother tantras. Now, when we talk about the application, is talk primarily meditation for the benefit of oneself. Well, the other 2 are primarily for the benefit of others, it is said. Now, this is the explanation is similar in the higher and the lower tantras. But there are slight differences about it. We talk about what they actually mean. What is the Institute? What is the Supreme King of Mandalas, the Supreme King of Activities? They're explained differently in each of the different concepts. For example, in the Yoga Tantra, all the steps from explaining how to gather explanations up to the meditating selfishness and the awakening stages all these stages taught in the Yoga Tantra. And this topic is called the initial application, the samadhi of the initial application. When the deities of the mandala are emanated from like the heart of the principal deity, this is called the Supreme King of the mandala, the samadhi of the Supreme King of the mandala. Later, when the wisdom beings are dissolved into this and they're seen like the old mantras and perform activity, this is called the Supreme King of Activity. In the Unexcelled Tantra, for example, like we talk about Gyanapada's tradition of the Guhya Samaja, emanating the mandala that comes from the wound, and then making the wisdom beings enter, and the empowerment offerings and praise, and the meditation on the subtle line. These are all the Supreme King of Mandala. And the samadhis that perform the pacifying and other activities are the Supreme King of activity. So there are many different classifications of these and different descriptions of them. But in any case, the Vajra master must know all the stages of the deity, or the stages of the generation of the deity. So it needs to be someone who knows how to do the stage of the deity, or the visualization of the guru. Now the third is the suchness of the mudra. Now in the textual commentary on Serving the Guru, it talks about there are two types of mudras: the mudras of hands and of the mental body, it says. Now in general, these mudras are taught in the Kriya Tantra, such as the root Tantra of Manjushri. They're also taught in Charya Tantra, such as the Tantra that manifests enlightenment of Vairojana. They're also taught in Yoga Tantra, such as Tatamazara and Sarvavid. So with all these, there are quite a few different hand mantras that are taught. There are many mudras with the hands. So in general, we need to heal our ordinary body, speech, and mind, and actions of the body with the speech, mind, body, speech, and mind of the activity of the deity. There's also the meditating of the mandala and so forth, but it's not just so we meditate on this internally and meditate on a Vajra heart and so forth, but there have to be external representations of these under the mudras. And the point of these is taught in the Supreme Glorious Tantra. It says a body is like, without a mind, is like a wall. It's just material. It's just matter. It's animate. It's like a wall. It's no different. And a mind without a body is like space. It can't do anything, just like space, it cannot do anything. So it's only when the body and mind are combined, is that you can actually do activities. And then that they have the capacity to perform actions. Likewise, the internal mudra and the visualizations and samadhi are important. They're very important. But when they come together, but the external mudras of the hands and so forth are really important. So when the two internal and external mudras come together, they're able to produce a result, and they're really very necessary. So if you think about it, so it says lesser, lower tantras, that if you omit the mudras, then the ritual is incomplete. So if you don't do the mudras, then the ritual is not complete. But it's not only in the lower classes of consciousness, but also the unexcelled tantras. They're very important. There are, for example, many mantras in the Vajrachatapitha and other tantras. So in any case, the guru has to be learned in all the different mudras. Now the fourth is the suchness of mantra. So these are the suchness of mantras that each yidana has many different mantras. There's the root and essence of Buddhism mantra and so forth. And this means that they need to know all of these different types of mantras. So it has to be someone who knows all the different types of mantras, knows the difference between all of these. And then there's the suchness of dance steps. This is the fifth. The fifth is the suchness of dance steps. Now here when we're talking about the suchness of dance steps, according to the textual commentary on the Serving the Guru, it means there are different types of dance steps, such as the net of bees. I talk about the net of bees. What this is it's the name of a dance step. And that dance step has, some you have extending your right leg, some stretching your left leg. And there's a Vajra step, and there's the turtle step, there's the ocean movement step, and so forth. There are many different types of dance steps. Now, within the Yoga Tantra, there are also the yoga dance, for example. And also in Kala Chakra and Dhaka Tantra, Saktra Samvada, and the Vajra Sang Tantra of Vajra, and the Vajramala Tantra of Guhya Samaja. And in other steps, there are many different dance steps. And these are primarily during the ritual of taking the ground. So there are many different dance steps that are done in this. There are also offering dance steps that are taken. There are many different types of these steps. Likewise, in Tibet, we have cham, lama dancing. If one wonders, is it? And it can be talked about, it's concluded in the guard, and it calls it cham, different types of dance. And what is generally said is that those that are primarily done with movements of the hand are called guard, and those that are primarily dance steps with the feet is a cham. So if you divide between the guard and cham in Tibetan, then it's another guard primarily refers to the dances with the hand movements. Those that are primarily foot stepping your feet are cham. For example, when you sing about Bhutanese songs, they do a lot with their hands, like the Bhutanese, and likewise also in Ladakh, I believe they also do. They do a lot of mudras with their hands. In Kham, of course, they move their hands, but they have such long sleeves, but they can't really see what their hands are doing because they're wearing such long sleeves. So it's like the steps of your feet are more important. In any case, when I talk about the guard in Tibetan, it refers to the dancing that you primarily hand movements, and the cham is dance that primarily is movement with your feet. So this is what Master of the Pass have traditionally said. In any case, the Vajra master must be very well learned in both guard and in cham and all the types of dance. And following this comes the sixth, and this is the postures, the seated postures. In the seated postures, what this means is, according to the Sanskrit commentary, it says, the seated postures are summarized in 4 types: the lotus posture, Vajra posture, Sattva posture, and wrathful posture. So it gives 4 types of posture. And so the posture here, it's like the way that the deities are sitting. So here it talks about 4 different postures in the Sanskrit commentary. Now, there are other ones that are postures that are talking about. There's the posture of the good, the squatting posture, the posture of disporting oneself, and so forth. And the master needs to know all of these as well. The Vajra master must know all of these. Think about like first I thought if we talk about the Vajra posture and the light posture, but I thought maybe it doesn't really benefit it, so I don't need to speak about the specific postures. And I think next is the 7th. The 7th is recitation. The recitation here means, according to the Sanskrit commentary, means that there are 4 types of recitation: wrathful recitation, Vajra recitation, radiating recitation, and cessation recitation. So there are different ways to recite, different ways to count the mantras, to recite the mantras. And with the mantras are associated with that, there are also the recitations used for the recitation, the visualization of the recitation, and the mantra to be recited, and a number of recitations. There's a lot that needs to be known. In any case, the guru has to know all about the recitation of the mantra and everything that's related to that. And so he has to be a very thorough knowledge of all of these. And the 8th point is fire pujas. Now, what it says about fire pujas in the text it says there are 4 types of fire pujas: the peaceful, enriching, magnetizing, destroying. So these are the peaceful, enriching, magnetizing, destroying fire pujas that we often do. So those are what I mean. The 9th means the suchness of engaging the activity of offering. So the Sanskrit commentary says that engaging in offering act is engaging insidiously in outer, inner, and secret offerings. So basically knowing how to make the outer, inner, and secret offerings. When I talk about the outer, inner, and secret offerings, in the Unexcelled Tantras, it talks about the outer offerings, such as the offerings of sense pleasure, such as form, sound, and so forth. Inner offerings are the offerings of 5 meats and 5 amritas. Secret offerings are the offerings of the non-dual bliss, non-dual great bliss. And so the Master does know all the different visualizations and the practices for making these different types of offering, I believe. And also when it says engaging the activity of this, there's a master named Prashanti Mitra who, in a commentary on the net evolution, says that engaging the activity means like the protection field, invitation, and so forth. So that's another list there. There's also a master, Ananda Garbha, who explains the engaging in the peaceful and so forth activities. And so this is this is another explanation that is also given. Now, the last of those is the 10 suchnesses, the reabsorption or the dissolution. What this means is that at the end, so the concluding part of the ritual is when we're dissolving, it's like we do the end of the concluding the ritual, it's the concluding ritual. It's like when, as it says in the text, in the Sanskrit commentary, it says when you have the request of the mandala to depart, and then we dissolve the Samaya mandala. So it teaches, and this is in general, in the unextolled Yoga Tantra, there are times when one does not ask the wisdom deities to depart. There is a tradition of not doing this in the unextolled. But in any case, the visualizations when dissolving or reabsorbing the mandala, and the ways that you do this, and so in terms of visualization, doing through the self and the front mandalas, in terms of the ritual, gathering all of the sand in the mandala and so forth. So these are all of these concluding aspects of the rituals of the sadhanas. Now, Je-Tsongkhapa also says that a Vajra master, the lower classes of Tantra, must not know the external substance as well. While so master of the Vajras needs to know the lower castes that are taught in the Tattva Sangraha Tantra, while the Vajra master of the unexcelled Tantra must know the 10 secret suchnesses as well. So this is, so Tsongkhapa says, so the 10 suchnesses for a Vajra master of the lower classes of Tantra is the level for that type of mantra, and then there is also the level for Vajra master of the unexcelled Tantra, and these are slightly different. They should be different, right? So now I've completed the explanation of the 10 suchnesses. So next, next is the line that says, skilled in the rites of drawing mandalas. So skilled in the rites of drawing mandalas. And so when you say skilled in the rites of drawing mandalas, according to the textual commentary on Serving the Guru, what it says there is, and so in the rites of the mandalas are the purification of the ground, taking the ground, stabbing the kamalas and the obstructors, and binding the directions and corners, and so forth. So as it says there, Tsongkhapa also says, that being skilled in drawing mandalas means being skilled in drawing the diagrams and painting the colors. It means the practice, being well versed in the practice of creating the mandalas. So before we're talking about the suchness of the mantra, we're talking about the presentation of the mantra, knowing these. So here we're talking about when you're actually drawing the mantra, it's the actual practice of drawing the mantras. And so when you're erecting the mandala, then first of all, you have to do the ritual of the ground. This has examining the ground, taking the ground, purifying the ground, grasping the ground, and blessing the protection field. And there's the different 5 parts of the ritual of the ground. And then there is a preparation. And so the preparation is generally said to have 4 parts. There's the preparation of the earth, the preparation of the deities, the preparation of the vases, and the preparation of the students. And so the secret mantra, mantra of Vajramaster also needs to know these. And the reason is because one of the main functions of the guru is to bestow empowerments, as I said before. This is one of the prime. So of course, there are different types of secret mantra gurus, but one of the indispensable function of the Vajrayana guru is to be able to bestow the empowerments. And with the empowerment, the preparations is the main part, and there's a concluding ritual. And the guru absolutely must know these. So like from the earth ritual onward, then the guru, the Vajra master, must do all of these activities themselves. Now, sometimes, of course, there is what we call the Vajra activity, the shrine master. They're asked to assist. It's okay to ask for assistance, but primarily it is the guru must do it for themselves.
대한 제동갑의 신비기 너르비 신면 나로라야 다다 레틱 세야가요 레틱 대에는 로벤다
Now, Tsongkhapa wrote in his great stages of the mantra that there's a drawing the karma line, right? And the master and assistant must draw the karma lines together, as the great Indian masters have said. Similarly, many of the tantras and rituals that when you're putting in the kind of when you're erecting a sand mandala, for example, you have to put in the color. If the master is unable to put in all the color themselves, then it is possible to ask someone else to help you fill in the colors. For the lines, if the student is there, then the master and the student may draw the lines together. But if there's no student, then the master themselves should draw the lines. This is taught. So for drawing the lines, there's no exception that allows the master not to be present when the lines are being drawn. And so whether the student is present is a different situation, but the master must absolutely be there when the lines are being drawn. And so in brief, there are many of the rituals of the ground and so forth, even if there's no one else, but it's okay if the Vajra master alone, if the Vajra master is not there, then it's not okay to do it. So for this reason, the Vajra master, or the guru, needs to know the practices of all the rituals of the ground and so forth, because if they don't, they aren't able to do it. And so this is the main point of all that's been set up to this point is just this. Now the next is being able to explain the mantra. So when you talk about being able to explain the mantra, now there are differences. There's a different mantra that says that a mantra who is skilled in teaching mantra. Now we talk about the translation of it is able to explain the mantra here primarily. Means the explaining the mantra in according to the highest middling of those faculties. So talking about being able to teach the mantra. We're talking about the master. The master means someone who is able to give the mantras and so forth. So in this case, this way. In the Tibetan translation of the 50 verses, it only says able to explain the mantra, but in Tsongkhapa's commentary on the 50 verses, he mentions that there's a translation by Chata translation. There's a different translation of the 50 verses by Chat Lotsa. Now, the one that we have now, which was translated by Gu Lotsa Chunampao, but there's also one translated by Chat. But I don't know if it's extant these days now. I did put some effort to look into it, but I haven't found out. I don't know if I'll get a copy in the future. In any case, in the Chat Lotsa's translation of the 50 verses, it says here, a master skilled in teaching mantra. And he said that this mantra is just a little bit better. He says, and the reason is that you need a master skilled in teaching the path of mantra to others, as I said. So this is the meaning that he gives. And so this is a better translation of this. This is what Tsongkhapa says. And it is as Tsongkhapa said, in the Sanskrit manuscripts we have of the 50 verses, the word acharya or master does appear, but that's not in the Tibetan translation. Because in our Tibetan translation, it just says skilled in explaining the path of mantra. And it doesn't include the word master. But if we look at the Sanskrit manuscripts, then this word master does appear. In any case, here, they say, talking about being skilled in the way Cheson Dapa Johnson explains it in his commentary on the 50 verses, that able to explain the mantra means being able to explain the mantras with the meaning of the conduct of explaining the mantra in accord to the able to explain the mantra's content in accordance with the faculties of the student, the highest, middling, or faculties. So when you teaching the tantra, you really need to know the level of the student's being. If you teach it, if you teach if you're teaching mantra without knowing the student's level, there's like the stories of Matamruta, the Matamruta and so forth. And so you need to teach the mantra in accord with the student's level. Likewise, it says in 7th Karmapas that you need to be skilled in explaining the path of the receptive and to the receptive, and to know whether they're receptive and you need to be able to explain the 6 extremes, 4 modes, and so forth to students. So you need to be able to know the receptive and the unreceptive and be skilled in explaining the path of the 6 extremes, 4 modes, and so forth. Now, the next characteristics is being sincere. Now, as it says, sometimes in some it says they're completely pacified. But in others it says rabdu dangwa, or sincere. So it can be either completely pacified or sincere. If you don't see this, it'll be difficult to see. So it says, able to explain the mantra, and says, then it says, there can be either, in the Tibetan, there are two different, in some it says up to Shiva or pacified, and some sort of Dangwa, but it seems that the pacified is, as in the Sanskrit commentaries, it says, the sincere. So sincere seems to be better. When we talk about being sincere, what it means is, according to the textual commentary on Serving the Guru, it says, being sincere is delighting from the heart with no stinginess. It's difficult to explain it when you look at the Sanskrit commentary. However, in many of the Tibetan commentaries, the way it is explained is that what it says in Tsongkhapa's commentary is that sincere means that someone who is like always delighted by the Mahayana. So it's like it's always delighted. What it means that they have respectful, sincere devotion and faith for the Mahayana in general, in particular for the Vajrayanas. They have really sincere faith and devotion for the Mahayana and Vajrayana. So the Guru should have this sincere faith in the Mahayana and stable faith in the Vajrayana, have this real sincere feeling towards them. The 7th Karmapa Chudajasa writes that sincerity means being dedicated to the stages of the vehicles of the Vajrayana, Paramita, and so forth. Sajjan Losok Gyatso writes in his commentary that Sarda's stable faith is single-minded dedication to the Mahayana in general, and Vajrayana in particular. And so this sincerity here means, it's like when we talk about faith, we talk about sincere faith, faith of conviction and longing faith. We have three different types. And so here, I think you can explain this as being sincere faith. Like when one of Gampopa's Dharma talks, when he speaks about sincere faith, what he says is what he says, sincere faith, when he explains it, means that when you see the face of a guru or hear their words, or if you come into the presence of the great sacred object, then it's like you get like goosebumps and your eyes fill with tears. This happens, right? Just naturally in your mind it feels a sincere faith. All of your afflictions are passed by, your mind becomes very clear and very sincere. You have like very clear appearances. And the virtuous side is just being really clear, right? And so that's what we should understand. That's what we mean by sincere faith. So as I combined with what I was saying before, when we talk the Dharma of the secret mantra, when we hear about it, we should be like to be able to be excited about it. When we hear about just merely seeing the face of the secret mantra guru, you have a different kind of real special feeling, like you get goosebumps, or like your eyes fill with tears. If that happens, that is, I think, what we call sincere faith. In any case, the Vajra master should have this for the Mahayana in general, and in particular for the Dharma, the secret mantra Vajrayana. The last one is tamed in their faculties. This is the last one, that they're with their faculties tamed. As I showed, it says, sincere and with their faculties tamed. When we talk about with their senses being tamed, here the senses being tamed means, according to the Sanskrit commentary, it says that their senses being tamed means that they've gained mastery over the senses such as the eye and tamed them. That's what it says, right? So what this seems to mean is that the eye does not fall under the control of desire. When you see beautiful forms and things, the eye does not get like attracted by it, just because only look always where there's beautiful forms. So this happens, right? And the ear does not fall under the control of hatred. And the eye, when you hear something, you hear various things. You hear different things, right? You hear everything, even when you hear everything, and there's a danger that when you hear something, it's going to disturb your mind. So your mind does not fall under the control of aversion. And your mind does not fall under the control of distraction. In any case, when we meditate on the creation phase of the sanctuary, we have the delusion vajra in the eye, the hatred vajra in the ear, and so forth. And I think that this all is teaching a way to tame the senses, right? You know, what Tsongkhapa writes about this is that their senses tamed, is that they restrain the gates of the sense with mindfulness and awareness, and they've completely ceased the distractions toward improper objects. So in any case, the main point of saying that the senses tend is that the guru of the secret mantra, the Vajra master, must be able to take control over their body, speech, and mind. They need to be able to control their body, speech, and they need to take care of that. They'll be able to direct their body, speech, and mind. It shouldn't be that instead, if they're unable to control, they're not able to control their senses, or not able to direct their senses, it's not okay. If they're not, they need to have been able to gain control over their subdue, to tame them. They'll be able to imbue them with, catch them all with mindfulness, awareness, and carefulness. Now, what it says in the Guhya Samadhi Tantra, it says, externally act like a Shravaka, internally enjoy the joined objects. What this means is that no matter how high the Guru's own experience and realization may be, no matter how great their experience and realizations are, it is important for them externally to be very peaceful, subdued with their body and speech. I think this is what it means. So in brief, as I mentioned before, we've spoken about the characteristics of a guru that we need to take, that the type of guru that we need to follow. And go, what type of guru that we should follow? Then it talks about these characteristics that I've just taught. When I talk about all these characteristics that we've just spoken about, are they just something that we taught in the text? It's something we should kind of hope to know about. And we need something like that, but in actuality, is that there's no one like this, you think? Is it like that? Or is it in actuality? There are actually gurus who have all those qualifications that are taught, those characteristics that are taught in the verses. Because sometimes, like with a help, when you think it'd be really great if there was someone like that. They go out and they're going to take a list. And if someone has this one, if they have this one, it's like them to take all the good things, all the best things, and put them together. Is it just something you write all the good things that they should have? Are there actually gurus who really have those characteristics? If you ask about this, is just something that would be nice if they had, or if they're things that actually have? Then we look at these life stories, the past masters of the Sakya, Gelug, Kagyan, and Nyingma schools. We can see that all the gurus definitely had all the characteristics that are taught in the 50 verses on the guru. These great masters of the past, if you look at their life stories, you see they followed the men of spiritual friends of all of the different schools. They studied greatly, they meditated and practiced, taming their own being, and they became great scholars and siddhas. As all of them definitely became like that. Not only that, then there's nothing in all of the areas of the 10 areas of knowledge, of the 3 Pitakas, the 4 classes of Tantra, that they didn't know. The way that we can know this is because if we look at the writings of these gurus, we can understand this from looking at their writings. And so there are many masters of all these gurus in the Sakya, Gelug, Kagya, and Nyingma schools, all of these gurus definitely had all of these characteristics of guru, exactly as they're taught in the 50 verses in the guru. It's not just like that. These like you're hoping that there would be gurus who have all these characteristics. It's not just like writing about his hope would be nice to have someone like that, but it's actuality. It's like it's not just a direct words, but actually something that we can know through direct experience. So if you think of it, it's like that in a good time, you think, in a good era, in a good age, it must have been like that. There must have been characters, gurus with all the characteristics in good times, but now we're in this really bad time. We're not talking about this really. If you think about it, in this area of the 5 degenerations, are there gurus who have all these characteristics? Even at time like this, there are more than a few gurus who have these characteristics in this, and this is a really great fortune that we have. For example, in my own life, in my own experiences, I've met many gurus I've had the great fortune to meet many gurus who have all of these characteristics that are taught in the 50 verses. This is really important. Now that there's really significant, great gurus with all these kinds of, but we need to recognize that they have these. It's like if going to a room of jewels, but mistaking the jewels, mistaking other things for jewels. For example, like if you want to go buy a really important thing, you're gonna buy it to recognize. First, you have to know that it's that really important, that thing. Otherwise, sometimes you can get really filled. You'd see like there's a mistake, and because there are many people who say that the fake things are the original. These would be easy to get fixed. Like you have this, you're buying a really valuable jewel. If you have no experience at all, and then you may not recognize that jewel for being the jewel that it is. And there are many great authentic gurus with all the characters in you. When you see them, you can see that they have like they're like hidden yogis. It's like all of the gurus who have these characters are really have hidden yogas. So even if they have qualities, they hide them. So what we see, we don't see them as having those qualities. Like they've intentionally hidden them, hide them all. And so for that reason, so for one thing, it's a little bit. You have to have a certain amount of merit yourself to see a guru, whether a guru has the characteristics. Only a student who's going to be receptive, whose appropriate vessel, is able to follow the guru, and one who is not receptive is not able to follow that guru. And so for that reason, should think that there are gurus, these two, who have all of these characteristics, and that we can meet them. And we should understand how important it is to follow the gurus taught in the 50 verses. So this is enough for this evening.